I'm going to move on to our next segment, which is a fireside chat. But in the meantime, just a gentle reminder, we do have the exhibition area later on. So at your own free time later on, please feel free to visit the exhibition area. So we have many companies outside. So if your business, you find that you need a solution, please feel free to visit the booths. We've got Aptio, Simulate, Manage Engine, Netscope, Splunk, Outsea, Hashicorp, and Cloud Kinetics, which will be presenting on stage next, as well as New Relic. All right, so please feel free to approach them to find out a little bit more later on, especially if you feel that your business, your company has a business need. Now, so our fireside chat, the topic, managing compliant architectures at scale to deliver secure client experiences. Our speakers, Shawa, Senior Director Solutions Engineering from Hashicorp, and 𝐁𝐅𝐒𝐈, Chief Revenue Officer from Cloud Kinetics. Let's join me to give them a big round of applause, please.
All right. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. It's that time of the day, right? Coffee time. Yeah. Well, today we got an interesting topic. So Ned and I, we're going to give you a bit of a view around, what we see in the market. Ned, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, just testing my mic. Yeah, it is working and it's so bright here. I did not.
I like these chairs too.
I did not expect the light that comes in your eyes here, but it's all good. Perfect. Well, welcome everybody, and I know it's a mouthful of a topic, but I promise you it's much easier than that. And it's just a casual conversation between me and Ted today. And out of curiosity, who here suffers or does want to know more, or something that you go through every day on figuring out compliance in your own organization? Just a quick raise of hands if you're one of those people who need to worry about compliance.
They're from the banks, Ned.
All right, perfect. So everybody is. Great, Ted.
Yeah, look, there's a few things that we at Cloud Kinetics kind of see when we engage with the banks, and this is more from an infra and IT perspective. I think someone was asking me a question earlier on around, what are some of the common challenges, and the first one really that we see is a lot of folks, banks especially, are kind of moving into cloud. And look, I think the journey to cloud has been there for quite a few years, right? And I think there's a lot of banks, a lot of the insurance companies, the tier 2 side of things as well, they've started the move to cloud, done some of the earlier, easier part, and they've kind of get to a stage where they're a little bit stuck, right? So that's one of the observations that we've had, and that's something that we're trying to kind of help address. The second part of that as well, which we kind of find it to be interesting, is, and I know that the previous speakers and panelists have kind of spoken about this, which is it's ranging from fraud detection and compliance and all of that, and a lot of that underpinned by data, right? And there is a ton of different, myriad of data ingestion points to consider, traditional ones and new Hadoop clusters, and all it's a very complex area. So that's one part. And the second part is really around, again, there's a huge topic around security that comes along, and new security threat vectors are coming in, when you start looking at cloud as well, right? So this is kind of the second aspect that we continuously see when we engage with customers, which is how do we kind of help kind of put some baselines around it, right? The third part, and I know that the previous panelists spoke about it at length, which is skills, right? Resources and skills are absolutely hard to get. Salaries are going up. And this is the third part that we kind of see as well. And part of all of this, the way we kind of look at it is to kind of look at how do we actually do automation. How do we help bring a bit of a baseline onto your on-prem and your cloud infrastructure? So that's kind of the approach to take to kind of get data available, provide the security, and provide a, kind of a skill-based solution around that. So that's kind of some of the things that I wanted to share as well. Ned, so look, one of the things that we kind of look at is, we use Terraform a lot, when we get with the banks, and a lot of banks are using Terraform. You're from Hashicorp. I think everyone kind of knows Hashicorp does Terraform, but there's a hell of a lot more that you guys do. Do you want to kind of share a bit about that?
Sure. So let me quickly tell you about how the whole thing started. So like long time ago, we had a great founder who was thinking about, and at that time there was only AWS out there, and we were always thinking, what's going to happen if more clouds comes in? And at that time, that was a dream. Like, what are you talking about? AWS had just 3 resources at the time. They had EB, they had S3, and they had EC2. And Mitchell Hashimoto, one of our founders, was thinking about what's going to happen next and how hard it will be for people to start standardizing on a bit of AWS and a bit of something else. So Terraform started back in the early days as a unified language to remove the abstraction of how can we interact with every cloud. Now back to the modern day, when I started at Hashicorp 5 years ago, we used to go to a lot of banks specifically, and they were saying, "Oh, but we're an AWS shop, and we don't care if we need to be multi-cloud or not." But we saw it from the very beginning. Every customer or every bank or every financial institution needs to have something from those 3 to 4 to 5 clouds. Everybody would need Office 365 from Microsoft. Everybody would need the good analytical tools and all the big data stuff that Google brings to the table and Bigtable. And everybody needs the DevOps and how the Lambda and the functions from AWS itself. So how can we make sure that we are in a place where we can provide everybody with the value of multiple clouds at the same time? Then fast forward to now, the regulations and the compliance become much harder. You're not allowed in APRA, for example, in Australia, to be on a single cloud. You have to have 2. A lot of regulations changed for Singapore and the UK, where 2 is no longer enough, and you have to think about 3 by a specific time. And this is a lot of work, because we're talking about skills and talent. You get somebody who knows AWS. Then you have to hire the same guy but knows Azure, and then a third guy who knows Google. This cannot be scaled. This is undoable, and it's very hard and costly. So this is when Ted was talking about Terraform, which is something that we created. Is they learn one thing, which is Terraform, that allows them to provision in the different clouds without the need to learn a new skill or learn a new language for that cloud. But all started from the provision space. And now back to Hashicorp and what we do. We try to tackle all the problems, and I've heard a lot of great 3 words in the previous Fireside chat as well. They talked about digital transformation, and this is a big word, and there's a lot of stuff that goes under digital transformation. There's an ecosystem, and obviously the skills and how can we skill up our people to be up for the job. But in our part of the digital transformation, we're the infrastructure digital transformation, which is most of the time is the first step. They talked about collaboration. We need to provide the people and the developers in our organizations with platforms that allow them to collaborate together, rather than going through single bottlenecks here and there. And how can we make this easier? So obviously, what we do is the first layer, which is the provisioning component on how can we provision on those clouds. Then the second layer comes in naturally is the security. How can I manage the secrets that flows between those clouds and back to the clients and back to the apps? And finally, how can I develop a framework to secure and make it easy to deploy those apps on the cloud? One great conversation we had with one of the biggest banks in the UK, they said we can bring up an app ready from scratch to a fully running app in less than a month to 3 months. But in order to get past the networking phase in the bank and the checklist, which is 3 million ACLs on what IP they're allowed to use or not, it takes them 6 months. And this is exactly what slows down us as enterprises. And this is why when we work with the digital natives or the born in the clouds, they overcome those complexities by utilizing such tools and the clouds. And finally, whether you work in the infrastructure side or not, on your day-to-day journey, when you wake up from bed to the time you go back home from work again, you're interacting with Hashicorp somehow. If you're ordering Grab, the minute you say, I want Grab to come and pick me up, Terraform provisions something that allowed this to happen, and the minute the payment transaction has to go, it goes through Vault and gets secured by Vault in the background. If you want to listen to music on the way and you're on Spotify, the minute you play a song, again, Vault comes in and Terraform comes in. So we're in most people's daily life, and obviously, depending which bank you deal with, I would say 75% of the banks, you'll have some sort of interaction with our products. But we are everywhere. We just like work on the infrastructure layer. And if you're in the development space, you probably know exactly who we are and know exactly how we can help you. But Ted, I want to go back to you and tell us how do you guys see the adoption and the digital transformation journey from a cloud perspective from your experience at Cloud Kinetics?
Sure. So no, look, I think part of the starting point is on the infrastructure side, right? And I think earlier on in the conversations, there was a lot of conversation on using AI, ML, and even if I was to kind of dig into that, it all starts with data, and the biggest challenge right now is data infrastructure. Kind of how do we kind of get that kind of put together, and that's kind of where we kind of look at a couple of things, right? So we specialize at Cloud Kinetics, we specialize in moving to cloud. So whether you're on-prem moving to AWS or GCP, whether it's Microsoft Synapse, whichever it may be, that's what we focused on. And the biggest area and the challenge that we look at is actually on the data infrastructure, the data warehousing side, right? So I think that's one of the areas that we look at, which is fundamental to kind of set, even for a bank, right? I think that's fundamental to kind of set that baseline there. So, and it's very, very complex, right? So that's one of the aspects that we look at. The second part as well, which, we are also working with VMware along with Hashicorp and the cloud providers. And part of the reason for us to look at this in a hybrid cloud world is because of, most banking segment, apart from the digital natives, are, you're coming in from our infrastructure space, right? So all of a sudden, when you're moving workloads from infrastructure on-prem to cloud, immediately there is a bit of an equilibrium gap, right? So there's an IaaS portion that everyone moves to cloud, but hey, you're still going to have your hybrid, your on-prem infrastructure for the foreseeable future. And you want to keep that in line with the IaaS capabilities of cloud. Otherwise, you're going to see a fair amount of issues that creep up, right? So that's a fundamental shift that we are seeing as an initial step of digital transformation, which is get the automation side on your infrastructure, on your on-prem up, get that quality up. And this is where we work very closely to kind of start putting that together, whether it's a VMware stack, like how do we kind of get that automated? And then, when you move to cloud as well, think of an AWS landing zone, right? So when we start looking at an AWS landing zone, there are two ways to do a landing zone, right? One way is to just create a landing zone, or if you're a bank and if you want to be compliant and worry about all the regulatory aspects of it, you want to create a landing zone that's security first, have FinOps capabilities. So those are kind of some of the things that you want to start with. So these are some of the ABCs that I would call it, which a lot of folks in the past have kind of, that'll be fine and kind of go do something. And then we find them coming back and trying to kind of put this into perspective, right? I think this is kind of some of the couple of very basic areas that we see, from a digital transformation perspective, just to start, right? And look, I think from that perspective, I think the partnership that we have around kind of getting into the vault from a security perspective, all of that kind of ties together.
Yeah, there's a lot of hold-handing in this journey, and I just want to share, like we've been very vocal about like you have to move fast to the cloud, but it doesn't mean that you got to move everything to the cloud. And this is, I think we learned this as a business, and we learned this with dealing with a lot of banks in this region and worldwide. And what we found is, like, until now, we would say more than 80% of the workloads globally are still sitting on-prem. And it doesn't mean that that 80% has to move to cloud one day. And just following up what Ted was mentioning, like, hybrid is here to stay. It is always going to be hybrid. And we, like, I come from many backgrounds in the storage world, and there is a big problem. Like, when you have data, and a lot of data has gravity, and moving this data around just is not something that you want to do. It's just a lot of work, and there's a lot of compliance happens around that data movement, especially when you're talking about geos and regional and all of that. And sometimes it's easier to do the analytics just where the data is, rather than move the data everywhere and run the analytics side of it. So what we have learned is, so the first attempts for the banks to be in that digital transformation was, I want to spin off a cloud team, and they can do their own apps over there, which worked. And I think that was one of the most successful attempts for a lot of banks to do it. Whether they spin off a digital bank, whether they spin off an umbrella of apps of that banks within that spin-off. But eventually, there'll be a time when they'll have to come back to the mothership somehow and connect together. And these are the real challenges. Like, how can we provide them with a secure framework and give them the enough security and all the ticks and the compliances that you are allowed to join that public and private somehow together. And I think this is what we love to do, because most of our tools, we work with VMware, for example, on-prem. We work with even servers directly, and we have the like the adaptability, and we have the ease of the cloud working when it comes to deploying something in AWS or Azure or Google. Like, I worked with an extreme tech edge bank in Australia, and what we did was we deployed Vault clusters to get managed on separate clouds at the same time. So I think hybrid is definitely the way to go, Ted, and I think this is the current challenge right now, especially with the demand from the regulators to be on multi-cloud.
And look, I think aside to hybrid, you brought up something earlier on around multi-cloud as well. And that goes back to the whole skill set shortage that we have. Do you want to kind of double click on that? Because I kind of thought, because the previous conversations were all around, a lot of around skilling. Do you want to kind of elaborate a little bit around how to have a common language of automation across multi-cloud?
Absolutely. So put it this way, think of every cloud as a programming language by itself. And if you're not a practitioner, this is it. There's CloudFormation, there's ARM, there's Google own thing as well. And every cloud has their own language. And there's no way, like, the human brain can, like, you could possibly do two at the same time. And that would be like the limit. Otherwise, you'll have to hire more people. And we followed the same approach in every product that we brought, which is, I don't want you to be locked into a single cloud. I want you to have a model that gives you the freedom to move. And because what's going to happen in the future, you want to decide to move to whoever going to give you a better price at the end. For a lot of workloads, not for all the workloads, but majority of the workloads where, I'm getting 25% discount today, and that in a bank, when we're doing thousands and thousands of instances, we're talking about millions of dollars in savings in like just choosing another cloud for the day. And this is like, depending on what your vision is for the next 5 and 10 years, this is the focus. Like, how can I have less friction on the clouds while I have full control, and I can just plug the cloud out and plug a new one in. That's as easy as that. And it helps you with the skilling, because all what you're working with your talent and for your talent planning for the new hire trainings and for the continuous training that you do for your own employees is just around the platform that you're invested in, and that will take you to any other cloud without with the complete abstraction of the language itself. Now, finding people is a different thing. Finding people is hard. And as Ted said, and as the previous speaker said, it's not easy to find those people as much as we had before, for example, but at least if you look at what the education system is bringing now, most of the people are learning that sort of stuff from early on. Like even we get Terraform skills everywhere, and it's something easier to find, and it's something that like, I used to laugh when I joined Hashicorp 5 years ago that people were putting Terraform as in their CV as yes, we're Terraform first and we know Terraform inside out, and at that time Terraform was only in the market for 2 years. But Ted, yes, it is a challenge, but definitely having the right platforms and the ecosystem and how, like you don't want to drill on that ecosystem and spread much on it. Just pick your fight,
yeah,
and stick to it.
Yeah, yeah. Now, just a question, just to see. Actually, I can't see properly out there, but DevOps. How many of you, just maybe a show of hands around, kind of working around DevOps or around the DevOps teams and the processes? Anyone here kind of? There's one hand I think I see. A couple of hands I see. So, so that was another part of something new that we have started to see, right? So, obviously DevOps has, kicked off in a big way. And, every time, you release something, especially, there's multiple models of doing it, right? You might have your DevOps doing on-prem, and you might be actually pushing apps to the cloud, or, or vice versa, depending on, what your financial systems look like. But one of the aspects that we saw, especially in the BFSI industry, was because there's a lot of regulatory reporting that banks have to do, and part of that is to kind of look at how to automate your whole infrastructure compliance, right? And every time you kind of release an app, you got to go through certain levels of security checks, and from a DevOps perspective, if you start doing that in a manual basis, there's a lot of chance to have someone miss something. Right? Although it's, it's not supposed to, and there are a lot of processes around it, human gaps, we tend to miss something. And this is an area where we've actually found automation along with Terraform to be able to go and automate DevOps. And interestingly so, to even look at doing some of the compliance checks and, ensuring certain configurations are set up for security and all of that, and we automate that. It's almost like DevSecOps, right? Because you are actually making sure there's an automation every time you release a version out. You automate that aspect, and if you find something, something wrong with it, then obviously it's a manual process to fix it, or there might be certain, policies that you apply to it. So, there is a lot of kind of high-end automation that can be done other than just infrastructure as a code type of automation, right? So these are some of the things that we've actually found, quite valuable, and in that sense, it's actually not only does it improve your quality, but also helps you do the reporting on your infra and your apps.
Yeah,
right?
no, I love that, and this is not just like we mentioned DevOps, but the whole world is moving to ops at the end of the day. Whether you're in the data world, it's data ops. Whether in your security, this is SecOps. Whether in your infrastructure, is DevOps. And the whole idea, exactly as you said, like we're trying to get out of the older ITIL frameworks that brings everybody to a single point of contact who has to approve a request with yes or no. And this is the challenge. Like, how can I put a preset rules of pre-approvals from everybody if everybody's following the same rules without the need to go through single bottleneck? And that's what the ops part is. And like put it this way, we have a lot of stuff in the kitchen, but what we want to talk about, and this is very interesting for me, like imagine you're running a camera, like just a camera footage, and you have like surveillance systems of 1,000 camera. Like, I think the research said a human eye cannot look at more than 3 to 4 cameras at once. That's your maximum. Now, you want to put more cameras on less people, it's up to you. But it's the same thing happens in the network world, where you're trying to monitor a crazy network of interactions that are happening that you have no idea about what's happening behind the scenes and what activities might be malicious versus which activities are safe. And this is where, when everything runs in that ops infrastructure, what happens is we automatically inject the intelligence into those apps, and we can tell, like, oh, this app have 4 ports open, but over the past 3 months, this port was never used. So I'm gonna automatically close it for you unless you tell me not to. And that's all driven by the AI based on those ops. Or for example, we talk about this port, the average utilization was X amount of megabyte per second, but now I'm seeing 10X on it, and I need you to look at it. So somebody's actually telling you where to look at in the big jungle. And if you look in any financial institutions, the amount of compliance that you have to do in those networks and the amount of security and checks that you got to do is beyond the human eye to do it. That's why we get a lot of fancy firewalls to help us out. We got a lot of fancy appliances to do that. But if we figured it out from the code, from the very beginning, that solves a lot of problems. And I think the world is moving to that path, and you'll see more and more such things happening in the future. And we always pioneered the automation side of things, and we come from the background that if it's not automated, let's figure that out. And I love that we are pioneering that network ops, for example, and the DevOps. But yeah, Tad, and I think my last question to you: when you work with banks, what are the challenges that you see in working at that level from a DevOps perspective, for example?
Sure. Yeah, look, I'd be lying if I said all our projects go very smoothly. But look, I think couple of things that we kind of struggle with is it's more the processes and the complexity within banks are very, very big. I mean, it's extremely complex. Every single institution is different to the other. And those of you who probably would have moved from one bank to the other know this, know exactly what I'm talking about, right? I mean, no bank is, no 2 banks are the same. The change in, understanding when we do a project to go in and have a look at, understanding the whole processes that particular bank has on how they actually do their DevOps, that itself is a bit of a ramp up, right? So that's something that we kind of try to do pretty fast. The second aspect is really around skills, Ned, because and I also keep coming back to it because we've been asked to either do a scope-based projects or, hey, can you give us, like for example, we get requests for, hey, can you give us Terraform engineers or Vault engineers? And so we kind of struggle with that aspect. And I call that a struggle because, we've done quite a few number of these projects, but the question is, do we want to go do something for a bank and learn and do that? Or, hey, would we want to help a bank who already knows their infrastructure to then give the folks to actually do the automation, right? So and I think a lot of folks, including ourselves, we figure that out as we engage with banks a lot, right? Because, everyone is different. And I find those 2 aspects to be kind of like the harder ones. I think the technology is pretty simple. I mean, Terraform, look, I'm not a techie, but in our company, the amount of take-up on Terraform certifications is going through the roof, right? So I reckon that's, it's not rocket science, so to speak, right, to actually implement it, right? I mean, look, what would you kind of see as kind of challenges that you guys would have?
we simplified the process over the way, and I'm mindful of time. We've got 3 minutes left, but in a nutshell, that we started and we continue to do a very easy to use a SaaS model, something that you can use on AWS or Azure. For banks specifically, because a lot of banks are still going through this journey of I've got a bit on-prem and I've got cloud. We do provide a Terraform version specifically to on-prem, and obviously, like as I said, the provisioning is the first part. But we try to since we have Terraform for a while, we started creating recipes. So I don't want you to come and reinvent the wheel. I want you to utilize those recipes. They're easy to use. I need a database that looks like this, certified from my database team. And you just figured out how the recipe would look like, and just press a button, it's up there. And this is it doesn't matter which cloud. So the last thing we want to talk about is which cloud you want to use. We're supposed to enable you to have the power of using anything out there. So so Terraform SaaS as a version, we're trying to push it like it's just self-managed and you don't have to worry about management. But obviously, if on-prem is important for you, or you want to be in a hybrid model, it will be a bit of both.
Fair. So listen, look, I mean, we kind of wanted to kind of talk about automation around how do you kind of take it from your infra on-prem to your data to potentially even to your end cycle as well. Look, any questions that anyone has? I mean, we do have a minute left. We would love to kind of take any questions. The easy ones to me, the hard ones to Ned. I'll buy someone a coffee. Well, it's actually outside. Great. So look, I think our job here is done.
Here.
Excellent.
Well, thank you, Ted.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time, and thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.